She comments frequently on legal issues on the national media and writes a monthly column for a webzine called Intellectual Capital, as many of you know. Ms. Strossen's writings have been published in many scholarly and general publications. She's published more than 200 articles. Her book, Defending Pornography, Free Speech, Sex, and the Fight for Women's Rights, was published in '95 and was named by New York Times as the notable book of that year. In that same year, she also co-authored Speaking of Race, Speaking of Sex, Hate Speech, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. Ms. Strossen has received an honorary Doctor of Law degree from the University of Rhode Island, the University of Virginia, San Joaquin College of Law, and the Rocky Mountain College. Other awards include Women of Distinction from the Women's League of Conservative Judaism, the Media Institute's Freedom of Speech Award, and the Free Speech Coalition's Freedom Isn't Free Award. Ms. Strossen is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ms. Strossen graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard College and magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where she was an editor of the Law Journal. Before becoming a law professor, she practiced law for 9 years in Minneapolis, which was her hometown, and later in New York. It is with great privilege that I introduce Nadine Strossen.
Keith, one of the lists you left out was Nixon's enemies list. I'm honored to address this important gathering of this important organization, which is an essential ACLU ally in one of the major civil liberties struggles of our time. And on a personal level, I am so happy to address my organization because I am a card-carrying member of NORML, as they say. What is at stake is not only reforming the marijuana laws, critical as that is, how very critical is underscored by the latest arrest statistics that I saw on NORML's website. In this supposedly free country, and also a country that politicians keep telling us is riddled by violent crime, so you'd think the police would have something better to do with our tax dollars. Here in the U.S., one marijuana smoker is arrested every 45 seconds. As I said, though, what is at stake goes beyond this particular travesty, terrible as it is. Indeed, what is at stake goes beyond ending the larger so-called war on drugs, which we all know would more accurately be called a war on the Bill of Rights or a war on racial minorities. In a New York Times story last month, Ethan Nadelman of the Linda Smith Center hit it right on the mark when he said, "The war on drugs is a fundamental evil in our society." Those are powerful words indeed, but unfortunately they are not an overstatement. And Ethan made that indictment before we had learned, any of us, how the latest news about how this cancerous evil is spreading throughout our body politic, corrupting law enforcement officials, perverting the criminal justice system so pervasively as to make that very term an oxymoron. In truth, it's a criminal injustice system. And that fundamental evil, to use Ethan's powerful phrase, is also degrading every prized constitutional freedom through judge-made drug exceptions. Just in the last couple of weeks, as Dan alluded to, thanks to the investigative reporting of Salon magazine, we've learned that in this Take No Prisoners war, even our most fundamental First Amendment rights have been held hostage. That government script doctors are putting words in the mouths of on-screen doctors and other TV characters or gags over their mouths. This co-opting of our supposedly free media as a propaganda arm of the state strikes not only at the heart of our most precious free speech rights, but also at the soul of our democratic political system. How can we, the people, freely exercise our democratic power to select our representatives and to influence their policy choices unless we have access to complete and accurate information? This latest outrage in the war on drugs highlights the critical importance of ending this fundamental evil. Now, critical as that larger goal is, it is part of an even larger effort, and that is, and it was alluded to by both Keith and Dan, that is an effort to stop the government from criminalizing any voluntary private behavior on the part of mature individuals, which does no harm to anyone else. As John Stuart Mill said in his classic essay on liberty in 1859, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. Correspondingly, he wrote, the only purpose for which government may rightfully exercise power over any individual is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. This is the fundamental civil liberties principle that inspires the ACLU's opposition to not only the marijuana laws and the whole war on drugs, but also to a whole host of current laws and government policies, everything from A to Z, or abortion bans to zero tolerance policies, to cite two very current examples. I'd like to lay out this larger context a bit to stress that NORML's valuable efforts to reform the marijuana laws are part of a larger struggle against government paternalism in many areas. The government is using, or abusing, its coercive power and resources, our precious tax dollars, to force mature individuals to conform to the majority's norms about what is for their own good, consistent with prevailing views of morality. Worse yet, the United States Supreme Court has expressly upheld some of these government invasions of individual freedom, designing distorted and dangerous constitutional doctrines. For example, the court explicitly cited majoritarian beliefs, so-called traditional family values, in support of what I consider one of its worst decisions ever, the 1986 ruling in Bowers versus Hardwick. In this case, the ACLU represented Michael Hardwick, who was arrested and hauled off to jail for having consensual sex with another adult man in his own bedroom, in his own home. And I was fascinated by Keith's analogy to the lesbian and gay rights movement coming out of the closet, and this movement coming out of the closet. There are many analogies. By a heartbreaking 5-4 vote in that case, the court rejected our challenge to laws that criminalize such quintessentially private, intimate, personal conduct. Policing people's bedrooms, literally, there was a police officer in the bedroom watching this sexual activity for a prolonged period before he made the arrest. So this could not be a more literal invasion of the bedroom by the government. It certainly smacks of totalitarianism, and I'm still shocked that this could happen here in our supposedly free society. Now, I told you this was an ACLU case. I'm fond of saying that the ACLU never loses a case. We appear in the United States Supreme Court more often than anyone else other than the U.S. so-called Justice Department, which is usually on the other side. We always have great lawyers on our side, such as Dan, who has worked very closely with the ACLU. But also, of course, we have truth and justice on our side. So as I said, we never lose a case. It's just that sometimes judges make mistakes. And the Bowers ruling was a very tragic mistake. In fact, one of the justices in the majority, Lewis Powell, later said that he had voted the wrong way. But by then he had retired from the court, so we couldn't recast that vote. Thus, Bowers is still, to use the lawyer's phrase, good law, even though it is such a glaring example of bad law. Precisely because the court couldn't show any tangible harm to any individual, it had to justify subjecting Michael Hardwick to imprisonment of up to 20 years on expressly majoritarian, moralistic, paternalistic rationales, completely contrary to Mill's core concept of liberty, not to mention completely contrary to the concept of liberty in our own constitutional system, as I'll explain in a moment. Even more frightening, some Supreme Court justices